Imagine winning $1.6 billion in the lottery. Now imagine winning that same sum of money every single day for the past year. 365 days of $1.6 billion lotto winnings. Well, that was the reality for the world's 10 richest men. And the gains don't stop there, though. A new billionaire has been created every 20 hours since the pandemic began. But while that may be the reality for the select class that is benefiting from the pandemic, the reality for average Americans is a very different one. Due to runaway inflation, the average American has actually lost an average of 75 cents an hour. That is even after factoring in wage growth. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm no Bernie Sanders, quite the opposite, but this wasn't wealth that was generated by creating American prosperity. Quite the contrary, this has been a redistribution of American resources from the middle and working classes upward that was engineered in the name of pandemic response. And even while we reach herd immunity, don't expect that response to end. We haven't just reached herd immunity, we have reached a total herd mentality, with close to 60% of Democrat voters polled responding that they would like the unvaccinated to be forcibly confined at home. By what force, you might be asking? Well, the Salt Lake City Tribune, their editorial board, is already advocating that the National Guard be brought in to enforce such measures, making us practically into Australia COVID camps and all. So the truth is that we were already headed down a very dark road. Joining me now to discuss is the president of the New York Young Republican Club, Gavin Wax. Thanks for being here tonight, Gavin.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Great. So according to this new Rasmussen and Heartland Institute poll, 48% of Democrats think the government should be able to fine or imprison people who question vaccine efficacy in the media. 47% of Democrats favor a government tracking program for the unvaccinated. 55% of Democrats are okay with fining unvaccinated Americans, and 29% are fine with taking away custody rights from unvaccinated parents. What do you make of all this?
Well, this is the end result of years predating COVID, but years of the left's campaign to dehumanize their political opponents. They've consistently dehumanized and otherized Republicans, conservatives, anyone to the right of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, essentially. I mean, I'm sure many centrists and even center-left people are now lumped into that category. People like Glenn Greenwald, whoever you want to throw in. Anyone who's not adhering to the latest version of the globalist, neoliberal, corporatist left is now subhuman, and thus any policies, any edicts, any laws, anything they can do to make that group's lives more miserable, to marginalize them further from society, to punish them for their lack of obedience is now justified. And this is sort of the political psychology, the mass psychology that's going on among many left-wing voters and supporters and their political base. They are essentially completely dehumanizing the entire half the country that they disagree with politically. It's a very scary trend. It's a trend we've seen throughout history. It never generally has good outcomes. And it's very sad to see that it's finally reached these shores to such a degree.
And for the longest time, I mean, we heard from the World Economic Forum, some of their advertisements that they would put out about the Great Reset. And then, of course, at the same time, then they would try and pull some of those videos and say, oh, no, it's just a conspiracy theory. But, a lot of their advertisements that'll say by the year 2030, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. At the same time, they'll say you and I won't own anything, but we can rent what we need. But the fact is, if we have to rent what we need, doesn't that mean someone at the end of that road has to be owning something? It just won't be you and I. A lot of that wealth is being, pushed upward, if you will, when it comes to this Great Reset. So that's the one thing that really sticks out in my mind when it looks at all these new, especially a lot of the big pharma billionaires being minted based off of our government's response to the pandemic. What do you make of this wealth transfer that just keeps right on going right under our noses?
Yeah, this is part of the plan. This is part of the agenda. It's a centralization of power, centralization of wealth and capital in the hands of very few. That's how they exert more and more control. And part of this is this marketing shtick, or rather a propaganda push, to justify this decrease in people's quality of life, their inability to own a home, to start a business, to have the quality of life that was afforded to prior generations, to their parents even. This is just setting low expectations, and they're trying to paint it as a good thing. It's extremely creepy. It's part of an agenda. It's an agenda being pushed pretty aggressively through the media, through our institutions, because at the end of the day, a population that owns nothing, that's fat, dumb, lazy, and petrified of COVID is a population that's very easy to control. And then you add in the part we were talking about earlier, dehumanizing the other half of the population. You simply scapegoat all of their problems, all of the societal woes on the unvaccinated or on the conservatives or on the Republicans. It's a perfect recipe for totalitarianism, and that's exactly what this is. It's just completely dismantling our republic, our institutions, our law, our traditions, and our prosperity.
And these technocrat oligarchs, I mean, they love gathering every year in January at Davos. And of course, it's still online for them right now. So you see the summit. And speaking of the WEF, you had Klaus Schwab. He was helping to introduce everything. I mean, I think it was the year 2020 in the summer. He wrote a book about using the pandemic, the governments around the world, their response to COVID, to restructure economics for their Great Reset. He quite literally authored the book on it. So now he's helping to host Davos. And he helped to introduce the Chinese dictator Xi Jinping, someone who also helped to mastermind the devastating way our governments around the world handled COVID for their own gains. And also Dr. Fauci made an appearance, of course, bashing, quote unquote, misinformation about COVID because, Fauci, he just never lies. I mean, that man, you can trust him with everything. Obviously not. So he was up there talking about all the misinformation going on. And, a lot of people were just kind of sniping, thinking, wow, the band's back together, I guess. You got Xi Jinping, Fauci, Klaus Schwab, and all the rest of them. I mean, if I was any of them, I would never show my face in public again, and yet here we are.
Yeah, they have absolutely no shame, and they'll cling to their standard talking points about misinformation. When at the end of the day, if anything that was being spread was truly misinformation, they would not have a hard time to refute it, to push back on it, and to introduce the true, real information, whatever that may be. The reality is they're scared of the truth, so they're going to label the truth. They're going to label any kind of pushback to their talking points, to their sciencism, to their lies, to their propaganda as misinformation, as untrue, unfactual. It's been fact checked, all that nonsense. So that's what they're doing. They're scared, and it does go to show. I mean, this is a positive note to state that the fact that they have to do this means that the tide is turning, that people are beginning to wake up, that they may have overplayed their hand, and they may have been a little bit too shameless in what they're doing. Like you said, I mean, the fact that they have no shame in all their lies and all the destruction they've caused and all the destitution they've wrought upon many nations of the world. They have no shame, but people are beginning to see through them. The charade can only go on for so much longer. Maybe I'm an optimist, maybe I'm too optimistic, but I do think the longer this goes on for and the more aggressive these policies begin to form, it's going to lead to a pushback because you're going to involve more and more of the population, even the quote unquote normies who are, just going along to get along. Even they're going to get upset and even they're going to start to question. And that's when this whole house of cards will start to collapse. But it's going to require some cojones from people in our country, in the Republican Party, in our institutions, in our country to push back and to make sure that the seeds are planted for, a revival of our republic and a restoration of our national ideals, which have been completely disregarded through this pandemic.
I'm of a split mind. Part of me thinks this can't be sustainable. People, especially as these years keep on coming, are just going to have to, start to let it go. A lot of the COVID hysteria. But then also the other part of me thinks, look at the TSA and, their absolute failures. They just, they make us all as if we're the terrorists. They can't stop anything. They always let weapons through whenever they're tested on this. And yet here we are decades after terror attacks and we're still taking off our shoes, being subjected to all these scans. So I don't know which way it's going to go. Either it will be with us for many years and Americans will be, I guess, happy to give up their rights, or perhaps there will be that breaking point. So quickly before I let you go tonight, I know you're in New York. I know the vaccine mandates, come into full effect there. How have New Yorkers been dealing with that?
Look, business is down. The streets are a lot emptier than they would be. I talk to a lot of restaurant owners, small business owners. These vaccines have really, really hurt business. It's hurt tourism. It's hurt, internal city commerce. People are simply going to Jersey. They're going to Long Island. They're going to the Hudson Valley. They're taking their business elsewhere. This has been detrimental economically. It's really pissed off a huge segment of the population. And even though the majority is vaccinated, this is still a city city of 8 million people. And if you're talking about, high 30, low 40s in terms of the percentage of people not fully vaccinated, this is a significant part of the population who are completely shut out from business, from trade, from commerce, from working, from living a normal life. It's furthering the exodus of New Yorkers, the brain drain. This is a horrible policy. It's not leading to any kind of better results on the public health front. I mean, even if it did, it wouldn't be justified. Don't get me wrong. But even their excuses for why it's necessary are not even coming to fruition. So it's a total failure. It's just another totalitarian step. They're trying to drive people out of the city, people like me, people who are dissenters, who don't agree with the orthodoxy because they want a political echo chamber. Even though they have so much power, they're so nervous and they're so paranoid about losing it, they need to just strangle their remaining grips on these blue cities and blue states to make them completely one-party rule and no question about being reelected or having to stomp out any sort of political opposition. That's all this is about. So if 500,000 people flee to Florida, that's 500,000 less voters they have to worry about, that they have to answer to. So in their mind, they're running a fiefdom that's going downhill, but it's still a fiefdom nonetheless. So that's where it comes down to.
Gavin, keep up the good fight, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.